Now, when we look at the law, you have one set of laws, and I assure you this is not a finite, all comprehensive set of laws. And it is one of the redeeming features of this program that we will not get diverted into discussing the legalese and which order said what and so on and so forth. But yes, the United Nations Participation Act must be treated as the umbrella regulation. As we know, globally accepted sanctions flow from United Nations Security Council resolutions. And the United Nations Participation Act is a legislation which says everything that the UN would want the US to do or countries of the world to do will be part of our national law. And so, United Nations Participation Act is an enabling law that allows America to align to UN initiatives. Trading with the Enemy Act, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, the National Emergency Act. These three acts are legislation that allows the United States to do things that are not part of a UN mandate, but Trading with the Enemy Act, for example, if the US considers a country as enemy, then any trading with that country is going to be considered as treasonous, and sanctions enforcement against trade with that country, against dealing with that country, flows from this act. Ditto for International Emergency Economic Powers Act and the National Emergency Act. And I'm going to be sharing with you some of the screen grabs of these documents or these lists, the power of which flows from these acts. The Patriot Act is relatively recent compared to the other acts. It dates back to 9/11 and of course is wide-ranging in its reach, particularly with money laundering, countering the financing of terrorism as principal goals, but indeed anything else that threatens the security of the United States. Another important act is the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, Katsa. Now, Katsa, you will find references to Katsa every now and then. Sanctioning the use of civilians as defenseless shields act is also a country level act. That last act, the global Magnitsky Act, is not actually a country level legislation, though it could be deployed as such, but it principally aims at targeting individuals identified with human rights abuses. Now, we're not going to go into any of these acts in great measure, but we will look at a couple of them to understand how law comes into being triggered by events that senators and members of Congress champion, and then it becomes a weapon in the hands of the President of the United States. There's an orange line below which you will see country-specific legislation. So the above the orange line is generic legislation, which gives a lot of power to the President to move against specific countries. But below the line are extremely specific acts which target specific countries, North Korea, Syria, and we will again see elsewhere for Iran as well, there is a specific legislation. But also Protecting Europe's Energy Security Clarification Act, PSCA, is about Western Europe relying and encouraging Russian energy sources. Okay, and that's going to be covered when we go back and look deeper into the US oil and gas sector. Yeah, because we do have a separate section on each sector and how US sanctions are to operate sectorally. Now, these country-specific laws are designed for that particular country, but that does not mean that laws above the orange line won't come into play or will not be used. The United States will use whatever is available in its empowering legal arsenal to implement what it wants to implement. Okay. Just as an aside, Caesar is the code name for a defector who shared 53,000 pictures of the victims of torture by the regime of the Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad, triggering the desire in the US to go whole hog in pursuit of regime change in Syria, so that the act is named for this military police photographer who defected. Operationally, it's the departments of the US government that act, and they act on lists. So wherever you see the word list, it is actually the bottom layer of the legal framework which just churns out to-dos. If a name appears on a list, and that list aims at preventing the export of all the things in that list to all the people named in that list, or the person named in that list, or the country named in that list, this becomes highly operational, it becomes executable, it lacks legal ambiguity. It's explicit, it's plain, it's clear, it needs to be done.